Hey, welcome to Elul New Light Activation Day 22. I'm broadcasting now from the holy city of Tzfat in the north of Israel. We are really surrounded by boxes and suitcases. We just arrived on Wednesday night late, and it is a big deal to move and everything, get everything set. But I just want to show you the view from here. It's hazy, so you cannot see the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, that's right down there in that kind of blue patch. There's some lemon trees here in the yard. Lemon trees are plentiful in Israel. Palm trees, pine trees. Anyway, let's talk about unconsciousness and what's good about it and how it works and what it means for you. We're going to do this quick because it's almost Shabbat. Maybe we'll continue the next day, I guess Sunday. Anyway, so in the Torah, in the Bible, it relates that in the very beginning, when man was created, the birthday of the creation of man coming up next Friday, Rosh Hashanah, and that is the creation, the birthday of humankind. That is not just a Jewish holiday, that is a human holiday. Adam and Eve were not specifically Jewish. They contain the souls of all mankind who lived then and who will ever live. So Rosh Hashanah being the birthday of mankind, it gives us a chance to connect to the core truth, because on that day, God's divine creative energy rises up, so to speak, goes into a state that's called dormita, which literally means like a trance. The same idea of when Adam and Eve were created, when Adam was created, Adam and Eve were male and female. They were created, most opinions say, back to back. And Adam, the Adam-Eve combo called Adam, which means man, was put in a state of dormita, of trance, and then there was that separation. So as we go into Rosh Hashanah, the divine energy rises to that place of trance from which it's like a refresh button, that all the old energy that has been running things for the past year, 2020, Tufshin Pei, will rise up to its source and will wait for us to initiate a new year. That's what we're preparing for in Elul. In its essence, Kabbalistically, that's what we're doing right now. We're meant to be creating the new vessels, like I keep saying, to rectify the past, to complete the past, to prepare us for the future. We're working on making vessels to contain a brand new light, because whatever we get to by next Friday, that's what's going to come into the world, then to be unfolded through our lives. Okay, so quickly, in the Garden of Eden, there were two trees. Really, it's two trees, really one tree, the external part, the outer part of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the inner part of the tree of life. And Adam and Eve, and there was a snake. There was Adam and Eve, there was God, the snake. So the snake tempted Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which they had been directly commanded not to eat from. And that, by the way, Kabbalah explains that commandment was only in force until, it was also a Friday. It was a Friday afternoon, and that commandment was in force only until the Shabbat began, and then they would be able to eat from all trees without harm. So anyway, they ate. They didn't wait the few hours, they ate. And what happened was a fall in consciousness. We're talking about consciousness. So there was a fall in consciousness from the global macro consciousness that Adam and Eve had, the first people had, we had as cells in their cosmic bodies and parts of their souls, was as complete as an angelic being could be. You can get higher than that. We're going higher than that. But it was as complete as an angelic being could have it be. And so as it says, Adam was able to see from one end of the world to the other opposite end. He was asked, part of his job was to name all the animals, which meant that he was able to see into the essence of each animal, each creation, to see the divine letters bringing that thing into being, because everything is created through divine speech. So they were highly conscious beings, and yet they were seduced by the snake. There's so much to say about that, but for another time. And at that point, from eating from the tree of knowledge and good and evil, there was a fragmentation in consciousness. So that what resulted was that every single human being has a unique perspective on the world, extremely small, like a tiny slice of a sphere, and in many ways distorted. So each of us is walking around, let's say 7.5 billion of us are walking around currently, each of us with our own view on life. And in many ways, our own view conflicts with other people's view. There's a fragmented, fallen consciousness. It says in the Torah that Moshiach will come, the Redeemer will come, when we are in a state of hesech hadaas. What does that mean? It means like a removal or an absence of consciousness. seems really strange. It can be, sometimes it's even interpreted or translated as Moshiach will come when we're not paying attention, when our consciousness is not on the matter. But in fact, the opposite of that is actually true, because we are empowered and invited and actually requested to participate in the revealing of this messianic era, and actually of the Redeemer as well. So what does it mean that we're not paying attention, or what does it mean that we have a lack or an absence of consciousness? It is a removal of that limited hadaas consciousness, that limited tree of knowledge consciousness, where each person is, what is that in its core? It's not just that we disagree. Sorry, I'm speaking so fast. Scott is going to slow me down, but it's been hectic, and I just want to get this out. Anyway, what happened was not only that there was a limitation in consciousness, and therefore a fragmentation that everybody sees everything differently, but there's a distortion. And part of that is that little voice that I've been talking about, which constantly tells you that something is wrong. Something's wrong with you, something's wrong with someone else, something's wrong with life, something shouldn't be happening this way. It has many, many different flavors of how it expresses that something is wrong, but the core of it is something is wrong. So why is this such a fallen consciousness? Because it is the number one factor in humanity, in our own personal functioning and our cosmic collective functioning, that number one factor that hides the truth. It is the opposite of the core truth. What's the core truth? According to Hasidus, authentic Kabbalah, the core truth is that this world doesn't even exist as a solid. It is only divinity, divine energy, and it is being in all of its forms and all of its details being brought into existence again and again and again and again and again, from the infinite divine undifferentiated potential out of divine desire with a plan, which means that there is absolutely nothing that happens that's not God working with you, working through you, dialoguing with you. So the judgment, particularly, listen, emotions. I've had a lot of emotions last couple of days, which is why I had to work to come to, it's always like that, like the challenge, brings you down, you expand your awareness, and then you come up with a more complete consciousness, But what does it require? It requires hesech hadaas. It requires letting go of your preconceptions, letting go of your opinion, the natural snake-generated hadaas, tree of knowledge, opinion and judgment about what's wrong. When you're stuck there, you're stuck everywhere. So when you can let go of it, hesech hadaas, you start to reveal. The first step is you let go. How can you let go of it? Because you know it's all God. Like whatever anyone does to you, whatever happens circumstantially, or especially it's hard when it's people. So something just happened to me that was very unexpected with someone that actually never happened. It's not very pleasant, but and it did trigger me, to be quite honest. But when I brought myself back, or rather forward, to the place where that awareness that it's just God in a costume, that it's a gift that is meant to expand me, so that changes the energy completely. And that is the first step in opening to the deeper reality. The more that we can open to that deeper reality, the more that we can do that in our own lives, that is a core of tshuva, of awakening, of returning to who we truly are and returning to God and what truly is. So when we understand that our consciousness mostly is Eitz Hadaas consciousness, tree of knowledge consciousness, and that underneath that, just like there were two trees in the garden, but really there was one tree. The inner tree was the tree of life, and the outer tree was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, tree of judgment, shame, guilt, fear, exile. The tree of life is the tree of oneness and divine consciousness and reconciliation and unity, union, really. Union is higher than unity. So just like that, each of us is a tree, right? It says in the Torah, Adam Eitz HaSadeh, man is a tree of the field. And one of the explanations for that is that inside of us is the tree of life. Inside of us we have a divine soul. It's at the root of the divine soul is godliness. And on the outside of us, we have the human, the judgmental, the fragmented, the separated, the unconscious. So we want to lift our consciousness away from that, separate ourselves when we have the opportunity, at any time, at all times. You can do this in meditation too, but especially when you're triggered, to remove the consciousness of the Eitz Hadaas consciousness, that something is wrong, snake consciousness, snake belief, to remove that and to simply, I want to say you do not have to be at a certain level to do anything. All you have to do is be willing, focus on the bigger frame, and ask for help. It's really important to ask God for help. When you want to participate in the plan, and that's what you ask for help with, you get the help, always. Anyway, and then to just allow for that deeper reality to emerge. Assume that it is something that is positive and will turn out positive, by the way. We don't want to stay in pain and then just assume it's positive. The tricky thing and the amazing thing is that in many, many, many and more cases, when we can assume that it's positive and allow for that and do the alignment work, ask, align, and allow for it to come out that way, things shift. I'll say one more thing, shift in our favor. I'm going to say one more thing about this. It's related just in a conceptual way. We learn about Yosef Atzadik, Joseph, who was sold by his brothers, and he ended up in Egypt, and he was put in a jail and in a dungeon, and so on and so forth for many years. And finally, he came out, and he became the Mishnah Lamelech. He was the viceroy to the king. He had all the power in the kingdom other than Pharaoh himself. So the idea about Yosef, what happened to him when he was, probably everybody is aware of this, even if you're not a Torah scholar, that when he was in the prison, when he was in the dungeon with the baker of Pharaoh and the butler, the wine carrier of Pharaoh, they each had dreams. And he interpreted their dreams correctly, that one of them would be executed and one of them would be forgiven and brought back into his place by Pharaoh. So Pharaoh also had a dream, and nobody could interpret it. He had all his necromancers and his sorcerers and his wise men and his advisors, and nobody could interpret the dream. So the rumor reached his ears that Yosef was a dream interpreter, and that he did it correctly. He had divine inspiration. So he was, in fact, able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And I'm just repeating the story in case there's anyone who doesn't know about it. But from this, here's the point. From this, the Torah derives that the dream goes in accordance with its interpretation. That the dream goes in accordance with its interpretation. Now, also in Torah, gullus, exile, this state that we call the human condition, this fragmented, separated state, this painful, struggling, limited consciousness, fallen consciousness state, that is called a dream. Gullus is often compared to a dream. We are like dreamers. When we are redeemed, we will have been like dreamers. You find that people who have near-death experiences, they almost always report that there was not just that there's a light, but there's a clarity, there's an aliveness. The colors are so much more colorful, and everything is so much more alive. Love is so much more loving, like nothing in our normal earthly consciousness. So when Geula comes, it's going to be even more than that. And we will have seen that we're dreaming in a world where things don't make sense, and where, we don't have control, and where everything seems random. So the point is that in this world, the dream goes according to the interpretation, which means that in Gullus, which is in exile, which is like a dream, when we interpret something's wrong, we are co-creating something's wrong. When we're able to do the work, because that's our default. There's nothing wrong with us that's what we do. That's our default. That's a result of the original sin, as they say, the original fragmentation and fallen consciousness. But when we can interpret life, events, specific events, challenges, etc., as this is a divine opportunity, even though it's feeling to me, even though I feel triggered, even though I'm scared, okay, God, I know that you're giving me something, you're teaching me something, you want me to incorporate something. It's going to be good. I'm allowing for that. I'm aligning with that. Show me. Bring it out in the good. When we interpret life in that way, life tends more and more and more and more to move into our favor. And what is that called? That's called miracles. That's called co-creativity. So there's a formula to this. I don't want to say it's purely technical, because the entire universe is God and we're working with this energy, but there's a formula, there's a science, I guess you could say, an art, a wisdom to working with it. And it's a work in progress, because until we are all fully conscious, and until we are all able to easily interpret things and they immediately show up in a favorable way, in a more true way. So we still have work to do, but that work can be joyful, empowering, amazing. And it's always, there is a human quality, I'll end with this, that is embedded in all of us, that when we overcome, when we make forward progress, when we grow, we feel joy and power. It's just the way it is. And that's because that's what the soul is here to do. So good luck, blessings to each of you in the transformation. We're entering the final week of Elul, so let's ramp it up. Let's get into a state of Shabbat where kol malachtecha asuya, where all the work is done, and we only have to align ourselves with it, connect to God in a gentle and blessed way. Nothing to change, nothing to fix, just to enjoy. We are going into the Garden of Eden, but it's up to us to bring our consciousness there. And with that, we create the vessels for the Shabbat, every Shabbat of the future coming year. And once those vessels are created, who knows how much light will come in. It's going to be a miraculous year. I'm not going to say it's going to be without challenges. That, I think, in large part is up to us. We have to wake up. Are we going to wake up through like a gentle touch on the cheek, a smile, a hug? Or are we going to wake up through, a loud alarm or water pouring on our head or being pushed out of bed? I think we have a huge amount of control over that. Let me say influence. Anyway, wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom. If you are a Jewish woman, I strongly encourage you to light Shabbat candles before Shabbat begins. It cannot be after. It has to be before sunset, or it is not a positive thing. You can look up the blessing online, blessing over Shabbat candles. The candles bring tremendous light. They burn the physicality and turn it into godliness. So strongly recommended. It's a mitzvah for Jewish women specifically. No. Anyway, and everybody can step into this energy and should. All right, I'm going to end now. Wishing you all a blessed Shabbat from the hills of Tzfat, city of holy sages. And